Hello, hello, hello. Oh, it is so good to see all of your faces coming through while you're connecting to audio. Big welcome to everybody. Lovely to see you. Hello, Jill, Vanessa, Kylie, oh, Scott, Jacqueline, Tanya. So good to see you. Oh, look, I love seeing all your faces. Now I'm just going to introduce you to the wonderful Mike House. We're going to hear a little bit more about him very shortly. And we're also going to hear a little bit about you and about me, but we'll get there very soon. So as we are entering into the space, I'm going to spend a rocking hour together, I tell you. I'd love to ask Mike to kick us off. Over to you, my friend.
Thanks very much, Suzanne, and welcome everybody wherever you're from. I'm standing on Noongar country, Whadjuk country here in Perth, Western Australia, and I'd just like to acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. One of the things that I think is just beautiful about Aboriginal culture is it's one of very few examples of human beings doing culture together for such an epically long period of time, and they no doubt knew some stuff about the territory that we're in today. One of my hopes for Australia is that we get much better at incorporating those voices and Indigenous thinking. So I'd just like to acknowledge them here on Whadjuk Noongar country in Perth and wherever you are from, but also all of our collective ancestors and histories back behind us to the dawn of time as well. I think it's really important stuff. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Welcome.
Oh, you're a beautiful man. So good to have you in the room with us, Mike. Well, big welcome. Thank you so much for selling us in with your acknowledgement. And I'm on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I'm sure we are spread beautifully across not only the world, but Australia as well. I echo your sentiments, my friend, and it's time to restore dignity to the culture of First Nations people, I say. Okay, well, if you can have your camera on, would you mind? Only because we want to see your faces. This is a conversation community that we're building. And whilst Mike and I are going to be in conversation to a degree, we are going to be including very much you in your conversation as well with us. So please make sure if you are available. Now, I do understand for some people it's lunchtime. Some people, they might be somewhere else. So I get it that you can't always have your camera on. But if you can, it would be wonderful. Today is also a chance to suspend judgment. It is by far one of my most favourite principles of being in a group of people in conversation. Because often we're in these experiences together where we're often coming at conversations with what we already know. And that's important, I get that. And there's also a really good opportunity for us to suspend what we know, to suspend the moments where we think we know, to open up new spaces. So that's a challenge for you today. One of the things that is important to me, particularly in having any conversation, is that I'm always like working towards a fairer society. Fairness is a word that drives me so significantly. So underpinning this conversation about the hidden impact of compliance and thinking about responsibility in culture, in workplaces, in society and community kind of underpins how can we be fairer. Thank you so much for showing up. It means, Mike and I can talk about ourselves all the time. It's fine. We do. But to have you with us just makes it a stronger and a better community of conversation. So thank you. We are recording, so we will send this to those that didn't registered but couldn't make it, and we may be able to use bits of it in places as well. So we're recording today for you to know. Let's get straight into the chat room. We're going to talk about ourselves in a second, Mike and I, because I know that not everyone knows who we are. But in the chat room, can you tell us where you are? So what state you're in? Not emotional state, not now, just the actual state that you're in or country. We'll get to the emotional state later over wine. And also maybe why are you here? Why did this draw you today? What's the reason? Whilst you're doing that, I will promise you we'll finish up at 5:02. So wherever you are, 5:02. Hopefully there isn't a South Australia person in the room where there's a half an hour difference, and I didn't make that very clear. But if you are in South Australia, we'll be finishing in 50 minutes. I can never do the calculations. And we will be also making sure that you have lots of participation. We're going to kick you off in a minute with a poll. So things to look forward to. So let's have a look in the chat room. I want to see where you are and what you're here for. Beautiful. Perth, Shill, my dear friend, Curiosity, come to the right place. Now, Bridget, Bridget. Is it Bridget or is it Laura? I'm just checking. Is on Whadjuk Noongar land as well, learning for learning and challenge. Scott, welcome from WA. Tanya's from Perth. Jacqueline's from Perth. Love challenging compliance and culture. You're in the right room. Hey, Glenn, a very, very, very old friend of mine. I haven't seen him for ages. Wondering how your work might connect and overlap with mine. Might involve anti-groupthink. God, Glenn's in for the challenge. I love it. Wonderful Vanessa at Tambourine Mountain. I haven't seen you for so long as well, my friend. And you're in Queensland. Beautiful. Well, massive, massive welcome. Well, we're going to get straight into it. I'm launching a poll. I want to know this. Have you noticed compliance creating negative impact in your work or community? Let's just see what happens. And then Mike and I will give you a little insight as to who we are. Whilst you're doing that, Kylie's in Darwin. Oh, how beautiful. And Matthew, Perth, love learning, wanting to hear everyone's thoughts. Wonderful. Great stuff. You're in the right room. All right. So we have 100%, Mike. 100%.
That's what we thought too, wasn't it? So it's kind of
Maybe
a
it was
relief
like
that it seems like we're in the right place then.
Might be a bit of an obvious, potentially we'd be better with our questions. Okay, so you've noticed compliance creating negative impact in your working community. Let's unpack that. Mike, could you tell us a bit about who you are and why you're in this room, in this conversation today?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Suzanne. I've spent 20 years working as a senior survival instructor with one of the world's leading arid area survival schools. And what that means is it was pretty much just like Bear Grylls, only real. We'd take people out into the outback and give them a tiny little survival kit and get them to walk a couple of 100 kilometres sourcing food and water on the country. And in parallel, I was managing change projects in the disability sector, which many of you will know is just going through massive change and evolution at the moment with the whole NDIS system starting up and evolving. And I was really curious about the intersection between, what makes someone capable of survival against the odds, but also what makes human beings work well in any high performance setting. And the levers I was pulling in those two environments were pretty much the same, just operated in different directions.
You're such a cool person. For those of you that don't know Mike, please get to know him and get him to tell your stories. You will hear stories today as well. He has the most fascinating experience and completely had Shield's gone, Mike, it's
Oh,
cool.
thank you, Shield. You're very
Mike,
kind.
it's cool. It's so true. So thank you for being here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Suzanne Waldron. I'm in Sydney, but I lived in Perth for a very long time. So I feel like I'm a Perthie, even though I'm English originally. And my whole life is about humans. It's probably more about humanity, actually, because I deeply get obsessed with how we act in the world around us, how we are governed, our cultural norms, our societal norms, our family dynamics, our relational aspects of ourselves. And I think sometimes we give our power away a bit. And I really like challenging the status quo. I'm deeply into human rights. I'm deeply into ethical and moral leadership, making good decisions, being active in the world. So I work with a lot of organizations, be it they can be non-for-profits in different global areas of the world in refugee camps, through to like really influential policy maker and decision maker rooms behind the closed doors where they all have different agendas, through to interviewing some really cool people on the stage. And I also curate I hope my multi-dimensional experiences for people to sort of question things and make good decisions about themselves, like be alive in the world. And so I get the honor really to tap into humanity, the psychology of humans, but also really sort of increasingly how we operate in bigger systems and the ecosystem of life. So that is my world. Mike, would you mind kicking us off with a story? Because I think you've been in the bush once or twice and you've got something relevant to this day.
Yeah, for sure. So going back many years when I was a participant as a learner on that 200K survival walk, I was very confident. I went into it probably overconfident. I'd already done lots and lots of years of navigation, both instructing people and using it practically in the field. And there was a bit of confusion. You know what it's like when a group starts to come together at the beginning of something, and there's a bit of deferring to each other and who's who in the zoo. And so I kind of led the charge and took us out of the blocks with great confidence, backed by an enormous amount of adrenaline, because the way that course was set up was deliberately to put us on the back foot. And we were following a big river system. So to me, it was just really obvious, we just keep following this river and we're going downstream. What I didn't notice, but neither did anybody else in the group, because they were just complying to my confidence and my leadership. And so was I. None of us were questioning anything. So what no one noticed was that we were gradually working our way uphill, which shouldn't be possible if you're following water downstream. And eventually we found ourselves almost up on the top of the plateau, still in this very defined watercourse. And I was confidently stating where we were on the map. And eventually somebody started to look, their eyes began to open and they started to look at what was actually happening. And he said to me, if what you're saying is true, then that cliff face should be south of us. And I said, yes, that's right. And he showed me his compass and it was directly north of us, which just totally crumbled the entire picture that I'd built in my head of where we were. And then we started to get engaged in, okay, what's actually going on here? And all of us started to get actively involved in where we were and knowing where we were and where we were going and questioning the decisions. So to me, that's a really good example of how if we run too hard down the compliance road for whatever reason, whether we're following charisma, whether we're following confidence, whether we're following deep knowledge, it's just really easy to turn our brains off and go along for the ride. We're essentially a little bit lazy if the opportunity presents itself to be, and we can end up somewhere totally unintended just because we were following a process or a system or a person without questioning and actively being involved in what was going on.
That is an incredible story. And because
it was quite embarrassing for someone that apparently knew what they were doing.
I mean, I do that in shopping centres, but out in the bush, I mean, geez, I'm always clear about where I'm going. Never trust me in directions. I want to open a question up to the room. You can take yourself off mute, put your hand up physically, or put your virtual hand up, whatever works for you. And if there's more than one of you, I'll help control that. But the word that comes to me is like blind compliance, because compliance isn't bad, right? Like compliance isn't bad in its entire form. But I want to understand from you all, why do you think we become blindly compliant or passive to making our own decisions in some ways? Does anyone want to have a shot at that question? And this is like a complete and utter, just go for it. We're suspending judgment. Thanks, Scott. We're in a really, hopefully a safe space here. Welcome, my friends. Scott, and then Glenn is next. Thank you.
Well, I work in the emergency management sphere, so we're in a command and control organisation. So to a degree, sometimes people remain compliant blindly because of rank. They expect that they're getting direction from the senior officer that they just have to follow it. Even though we tried early on in people's careers, we try and say you can actually think, you can actually say no, or in the right way, respectfully question that direction. But some people don't have the confidence to do that, or there's got some Chatham House rules, senior officers that have bluff and bluster that, and people just follow it blindly. So I suppose in the area that I work, that's probably one reason why people follow it blindly.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. That is so true, especially as it acts as if they know, or they don't have the confidence. Like there's an element of them that doesn't want to be exposed. It's about being exposed, isn't it, sometimes? Yeah. Glenn?
Now, the other side of that is feeling isolated. You think you're alone in your questioning of what's going on, and you feel alone in that your assessment of the situation must be wrong because you're the only one who thinks that way, when in reality everyone in the group feels the same way. Everyone in your trek was going, are we going in the right direction? But nobody said it. So it's that sense of isolation and not being the one to want to stick out and stand out, to raise their hand. And I had an amazing friend at uni, and she was the stereotypical dumb blonde who was so smart because she asked the questions we always wanted the answer to. And everyone would groan. She'd, oh, Lucy's asking a question. But then she'd get the answer to her question. We'd all go, oh, yeah, I was thinking about that the wrong way too. And yeah, so that's the kind of situation that I see going on all the time in companies and organizations. Needing someone to be brave to take that first questioning, gives other ones permission to put their 2 cents worth in.
Vanessa, thank you, Glenn. Vanessa?
I think that at least in my lifetime, Australia in general, just talking about Australia, has become a very highly regulated society. I think we're very highly regulated. I don't know about any of you guys, but the last time I went to Europe, when I landed, I was able to breathe a sigh of relief because you just know the rules are different. There's less of them. And I think that has made us become a very compliant culture over time. Generally speaking, Australians are typically rule followers. We'll do as we're told. Of course, there's exceptions to that rule, thank heavens. But I think that we are very compliant in general. And I think you lose the magic. I work in the ESG field, and measurement has become, it's doing my head in, to be honest. Not that I think it's a bad thing, but we are at risk of losing the magic when we try and measure everything. And I relate that to compliance. I'm looking at it very, very in that sort of narrow corridor or broad corridor now of ESG. But you can't measure some things. You can't comply with those. You have to comply with those regulations, but then we're at risk of losing something really important, I think.
And Sheila, I'll come straight back to you and then Mike. And the thing is, you can measure everything. It's just what you're choosing to measure. You can measure chaos. You can measure, innovation. You can measure creative thinking. You can measure everything. It's just what do we put our attention on, which is what counts. We'll come back to that because that's from Vanessa. Sheila, and then Mike.
Confusion and overwhelm of information. There is so much information that it's confusing. When things are confusing, we become blindly compliant because we don't know what to do. We don't know what information to believe, what information is right, what's incorrect. And I feel that way. There is so much noise. We scroll through LinkedIn and there are 10,000 posts with noise. So what do we listen to? What do we read? And it's overwhelming.
Yep, I hear you. You're bang on there, Shil. We're going to talk a bit about that too. Kylie, we'll come back to you if that's okay. I'm just going to go to Mike and then I'll keep you in the queue. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about what blind compliance really is about?
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. There's a comment as well from Tanya in the chat about the experience of being shut down and not listened to as well, which is obviously part of the mechanics of this. That relates really strongly back to what Scott was saying too, in terms of, if there's, whether it's real or not, that was certainly true on that walk where people were kind of like, Mike's giving us no space to question this, and whether that was true or not true, if it's people's experience, I think, the room to question and think is often just not there. Possibly that's part of the challenge with social media as well, Shil. On top of the volume, there's also the relentless pace of it, which means that, we're on to the next thing before we've even really digested the last thing that we saw. So for me, the blind part, there's a really interesting piece in the work of survivor psychology. So there's a whole realm in psychology about the survivor personality, what makes people more likely to survive against the odds, and this is a really key part of it, is that they're compliant. They're not rule breakers for the sake of it, but they will break rules wherever the rules no longer serve, and at the very least they'll question them. And we had a really interesting example here in Western Australia a number of years ago where the Canning Stock Route runs between Willoona and Halls Creek. It's a really isolated 4-wheel drive track, and people tour it quite regularly. It's a pretty popular off-road touring option. Takes somewhere between a week and 3, depending on how fast you're going. There was a Japanese tourist who did the right thing, called into the Walloona police station to say he was entering the track, and the local police said, you know, don't drink the local water because it'll make you sick. And, you know, that's fundamentally sound advice. You should boil it or purify it or something. The guy came off his motorbike and really badly fractured his leg, fortunately close to one of the ground wells that was there. And so he crawled his way back to the well, and they're quite shallow wells that have, some of them, very accessible. And when he was found, he was very, very close to dehydrated, and he basically had his feet in this fresh water and was bucketing it over his head, but he wasn't drinking it because the police had told him not to. There's that. So I think there's two things. There's very much the kind of stuff that Scott was talking about. If there's a sense of authority that goes with whatever the rule set is, there's you know, it's deeply taught into us. You know, we learn it growing up and through school systems and everywhere else that we shouldn't go against that kind of authority. And for the vast majority of stuff, that makes really good sense. You know, we drive on the left-hand side of the road and put our seatbelts on for really good reasons. Don't reinvent the road rules every time we jump in the car. And the other side of it, I think, is that there's for some people, it's such that rule set is so important that they won't actually look around and question it. So, you know, that guy very nearly died of dehydration with his feet in fresh drinking water. And in the work that I do, I see that often around the place, where either the deference to authority or the laziness of, you know, laziness or distraction. You know, I don't have the time or the energy to question this, so I'm just going to follow whatever the directive is. It's often easy. It's often quick, it's often convenient, and it lulls us into a false sense of security that means that we can end up down a road where we haven't really thought about it. And there's definitely been some evolution of that in the physical safety culture in that world, where, you know, you get fantastically evolved safety systems and still see horrible accidents because people aren't actually thinking anymore. They're just kind of going, that system will catch us.
Yeah, it's a beautiful addition. I want to delve in a little bit to the driving nature of what Mike is talking about, what we're all talking about. And Carly, I haven't forgotten you, so I'm going to come to you after this if it's still relevant. If we want a civil society, there has to be a level of standardization. There has to be a level of rules so that we have a place that is of comfort or has some kind of standing order. Most ecosystems, or the largest of ecosystems being the universe, has a place of order, and that is a natural law. You think about where we've come from in the last 100 years and the fact that the Industrial Revolution has really sort of driven us into a place of efficiency for good reason. So whenever a war happens, something in the community and the societal norms then get sort of born from that, out of necessity of war. And we become like that production-oriented sort of community where the workday was driven, and people were, you know, engendered, and also people had different types of roles in the community. If you flick forward a little bit more, then we start getting into agenda-driven advertising, marketing, media, pharmaceuticals, all the stuff that we all know about. But what happens is, as we start to sort of drive ourselves further and further towards this closed perspective, where the grip on civil society is owned by a few, and the people with the most power and the most privilege and the most access to the platform, it's like a domino effect of sort of like this exposure for them to be able to, and people who want to, in the political landscape or even the consumer landscape, materialism landscape, to start driving the agenda of what sells. And this is where we get conditioned. So I personally believe that we are beginning to lose the ritual aspect of the tribe mentality that's really only supposed to be about 70 to 150 people. We have a globalization which gives us access to so much. And what happens is that we get conditioned to be a certain way where we become self-sufficient. We under a guise of self-sufficiency, you know, we can have things delivered, and we can have things decided for us, and we can start to sort of remove ourselves from the collective, even though I do think it's a bit of a mask and a shield that we do that, because I certainly couldn't have made this on my own. And if you think about just general conditioning, where we're just getting plummeted every single day by what we should do and how we should be and how we should think, it's no stretch of the imagination that we just then start blindly following what's normal. The reason this is really appealing to most of humanity is because of what people are saying in the chat here, is that there's a fear and of adverse consequences of breaking the rules from Glenn. And also Jacqueline is speaking a lot about being shut down, or you might be ridiculed, or you might be seen as non-compliant as pushing up. And so we don't want that. We generally don't like conflict. We don't want to be exposed. And so I think there's a lot of the organizations, a lot of community, and certainly the world in which we live from a societal perspective is just continuously bringing us into wanting us to be a certain way, so that like major agendas can be sort of completely and utterly adhered to. And as that happens more and more, we're really tapping into the human instinct of protection, the human instinct of status, and also wanting to attain and attract things for ourselves so that we can be safe. And that just looks like these days houses and cars and a certain job and a status and maybe a title, and all the things that we think are important to seem important in the world. So I know this is existential. We probably should have wine for this conversation at least. But I wanted to dive in a little bit to some of what I believe are the fundamental drivers as to why the conditioning of how we act, we become blind. And other words I use are passive or apathetic. And so what we want to do in this conversation today is think about how are we are all, by the way, every single one of us in this. To live off that grid is, you have to be completely different in terms of not succumbing to the entire world of technology or internet or food or the way things are manufactured. Like we're all in it. So I'm not saying that's not the case. But what I want us to explore today is in workplaces where, people want people to use their initiative. And I always say, so many leaders like, we want you to use your initiative, and then someone does and they go, not that initiative. Or you see it all the time. Or different types of environments where we actually need new solutions to things. We need to think of new ways to preserve. But if we're stuck inside the conditioning that we are tapping into for our own protection, then what we're doing is we just have that fear, and you've all talked about that to this point, of exposure, or fear of ridicule, or fear of being sought out because of something else. And I think what we need to do is have far less comfort in that space. But unfortunately, at the moment, the way that the world is kind of navigating that is that you will get shut down and you will get jumped on. And so what I think is important for us to do is to sort of start to work out what spaces can we have these types of conversations in, and how can I personally get uncomfortable with certain situations because there's a bigger picture of something I need to be uncomfortable for. So I'm just adding that as a little bit of a background, as a driver as to where I think blindness of compliancy and blindness and of responsibility plays in. Kylie, did you still want to talk about the thing that you put your hand up for? Have we moved too far past that now?
I think there's been plenty of other ways of saying what I wanted to say, so I'll let you guys move on with that.
Got it. Beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. There was one thing, just what you just said then was, I actually just wrote down that what does happen is people will feel confident enough to chat to their colleagues or a colleague, which then becomes a bit of, dare I say it, like a bitching almost. And then, but they don't take it to the people that actually can support or assist with affecting change. And so then this culture then changed to whinging and not proactive change or things like that. So I think, yeah, that's not good for culture.
You, Mike, let's talk about responsibility, because this Kylie's comment feeds into that as well. What is where do we take responsibility and where do we kind of sometimes pass over responsibility? And how does that factor into this conversation from your point of view?
Oh, great question. I think that we pass over it in all kinds of ways and pretty much everywhere. I certainly know I do. And it gets tangled up with accountability, I reckon, the notion of responsibility. So a really good example is, we walked this morning for a coffee just at our local coffee shop, and as we're crossing the town square, Donna, my wife, stopped and picked up a bit of rubbish. She's not accountable for that. It's not her job to clean the streets. She didn't put it there in the first place, but she chose to take responsibility for it in the moment. And I reckon we see this a lot in workplaces too, where some of the ways that compliance can hinder us is that we get too rigidly stuck into, this is my role, this is my job, that's your stuff, and we tend to, without a bit of careful structuring of how we think and work together, we tend to fire shots at each other for where the gaps are, rather than work out how do we all take responsibility for this, even if it's not actually directly in my realm of something that I should be doing. There's obviously a balance there to strike, in that we don't want to be, I don't want to be stepping into your territory and doing your work for you in a way that diminishes your accountability or responsibility, or fires across your bows and actually adds hindrance. But I do want to be able to step in to assist and to help. What Kylie was saying, I think, really dovetails into this, where the different cycles that you see. One is a cycle of blame and gossip and externalizing everything. So that's not me, it's leadership, or it's government, or it's the rules, or it's the lack of funding, or it's policy, or it's whatever it is, and we're kind of not happy with it, but we're also not doing anything about it, versus the other way, which is always someone else. The other way is kind of taking that responsibility, and it becomes a more virtuous cycle where all of us are looking at, how can I add to the success of this? What part do I play in it? There was a great comment earlier in the chat about, where's that line between rule breaking versus questioning things? And I think that's a really, really good question. You don't want to be just flaunting rules for the sake of it. That's certainly not what this is about. Compliance has very real functions and great value for all kinds of reasons. The piece is more about, how do we have our eyes open?
Yeah, because we don't want anarchy. We don't want anarchy, and we don't need a whole bunch of chaos.
No.
In the sense that it's become so unpredictable that we can't see the woods for the trees. But I think, what comes up for me also, Mike, and what you're talking about in terms of responsibility is, like, I notice a lot of people take responsibility deeply for things they actually can't control.
Yes.
And burn out.
Yeah,
like organizations
absolutely.
Burn out. But then the things they not should be, I don't want to say that, but they could be prioritizing different types of responsibilities. I have a thing that I call the criteria of life. What's your criteria of life? What are your priorities? What are the things that you are absolutely clear that are non-negotiables in your morals, your active activities, your practices? I was combining active and activities.
It's a new word.
I'm good at that. My favorite combined word was intertwingle. But anyway, we'll come back to that. But we're all the things that we're doing in any given day, be our belief systems, the things that we're doing, and also the things that we engage in. What are our priorities? And a lot of people end up getting addicted to, behaviorally, to things like news cycles in other areas. So, for example, for me living in Sydney, if a truck crashes on a highway in Queensland, for example, there's nothing I can do about that in that moment. and it is actually got nothing to do with me. Now, it doesn't mean I shouldn't take responsibility if there's some kind of road rule or something that needs to happen. But ultimately, most of the time when we're watching things like the news, we get addicted to the drama of these things. And that might be like, you know, kind of talking about gossiping. You know, it's good to gossip and vent, for example, but then I'm not going to take responsibility or go to the places where I might need to go to make something change or to take responsibility for something. And quite often what I'm seeing in humanity, in workplaces, in communities, is like someone else said, it's all out there. And if it's out there, then I'm an observer to it. It's actually not part of me. I'm observing this. And I can get attached to the drama and the adrenaline spikes and the cortisol spikes and all the things that happen in my body, the dopamine loops and all the things I'm looking for without actually being involved. And it makes me be disassociated from something, and I can get immune to it also. And so inside organizations, you know, the thing that I'm really, and that is exactly how the control starts, Jacqueline, you're on the track here. And the things you want to look at inside organizations is the unconsciousness of these belief systems. I see so many organizations set their people up to fail because they think they want one thing and then they hamstring them. Because what they're really looking for is profit. They're not really looking for innovation, or they're looking for innovation, but they want it in a certain way because they really want the shareholders to get what they need. And so there's these mixed messages happening everywhere because we don't have a really clear set of standards or criteria to something that we think is most important to prioritize. So I'm just going to open up to the room because, you know, it's not just about me and Mike talking. Anyone who want to comment, add, question, you go for it. We want to hear what you got to say or ask. I'm really good at this game, just so you know. And if not, it's okay, because I've got another question for Mike. Mike, we've talked a bit about I've not got my words today. Psychosocial principles, hazards, and regulations and legislations coming into play in the organization a little bit more lately. This kind of taps into some of the safety aspects of what we're talking about in terms of keeping people safe. But when does that become a hazard in a compliant kind of a way, and when does it become something that's necessary? And can you define psychosocial for us as well?
Yeah, so
questions. One.
There's a couple of threads to that definition, I think, Suzanne. So the first one comes from the work of psychological safety, and psychological safety, psychosocial hazards related, but a little different. So psychological safety is that sense that I can speak up, I can question, you know, I can challenge, I can ask questions if I don't know, I can point to errors, I can own and take responsibility for my own errors without a sense that there's going to be any sort of kickback or backlash on me. In terms of psychosocial hazards, it's at its worst, that's the territory of bullying and manipulation, and along that continuum we get into the kind of territory of, you know, we're working long hours, we're working in an unclear environment where we're being blamed for things that aren't our territory, where there's unreasonable demands placed on us. And just recently, pretty much right across Australia, this has actually been put into work health and safety law just last year. So it's pretty poorly understood as yet in organisations, and we're just starting to see some early test cases coming in. Where basically now an organisation has to take a similar level of responsibility and accountability for my social and emotional well-being at work as we do for our physical health and safety at work. So it's a really good evolution. For me, the journey that we took in physical safety is really informative here. So in physical safety, at around the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the whole approach was, hey, this stuff's risky, so join at your own peril, and if you die or get hurt, well, too bad, so sad, you should have known. And then we evolved into kind of like, you're responsible for it. So it was very much up to the individual to keep an eye on their own safety, and if they hurt themselves, it was pretty much their fault. And then it evolved into gradually systems that were really reactive. So if there was an accident or an incident, then we'd kind of try and bolt a heap of stuff on to prevent it from happening again. And very often the feeling of those was the systems kind of got in the way of the work. So people would go, oh yeah, we've got to tick all these boxes and jump through all these hoops, and it's really kind of getting in our way. Then it kind of moved into being much more proactive. So we're starting to preempt things happening and being, much more forward thinking about how do we actually get ahead of this game and identify risks and get sort of formal about risk assessment for almost everything. And where it's kind of eventually got to in the best of cultures is safety is now just part of how people think. And it's really that transition from just a tick box systems mentality to those systems are there. And we also have a bunch of people who've really got their eyes open in those systems. So I no longer just accept that because the system is there, I'm safe. I take responsibility for my safety, but also yours. We're constantly looking at the systems. So my hope with psychosocial safety is we can just kind of go straight to that end point without that really clunky working our way through lessons that have already been learned. That's going to take a little bit of insight because the hazards are less obvious in many ways. If there's a machine that could take someone's arm off, both the hazard and the result are really, really visible. They're totally tangible. It gets much harder when we talk about a lot of the stuff that's in the chat here about, where is that line of, I should keep my head down and not make waves versus I should absolutely be questioning our systems and asking and challenging. There's a balance in that, and there's some really obvious behavior. Bullying is a great example where it just shouldn't be acceptable and it's really obvious that that's what it is. But there's also some really fine lines there where we're potentially crossing boundaries of cultural misunderstanding or some cultures where banter and that sort of territory is really a real part of the culture, and it works really, really well. And you put someone who's not from that culture into it and it's like, this is terrible. How come people treat this way? So there's some real balances to find in there, but I kind of hope that we can get closer to that sort of resilient and really deeply embedded culture much faster than the couple of 100 years it took us with physical safety.
Beautiful. I think you've really hit the nail on the head there in terms of what I think is about appreciating difference. So underpinning everything that you've just talked about in terms of cross-cultural collaboration, cross-cultural understanding, through to the psychosocial, I have to say that much slower than I've been saying it, perspectives where we're looking at the internal workings of a being rather than the external physical workings of a being. We're looking at, how we treat someone, how we might unexpectedly be bullying or be gaslighting or shutting someone down or ridiculing or creating an environment of mocking and bantering and things that aren't appropriate in the most basic of any type of culture, particularly in the workplace. And I think some of the things that I've studied and looked at is about really understanding that you or I as a person have nothing to protect if you're clear with your strength of your character. But then it's about, how do I then relate? How do I communicate? How do I use language? How do I stand up for things appropriately? How do I reject something? How do I extend something? How do I explore something? When do I know what my boundaries are? How do I use the right words? How do I communicate this in any given place and time? But I reckon the answer is you've got to first know that criteria of yourself. What is my personality? What are my strengths? Where are the things that I will and won't let walk past me? Then it's about, how do I communicate that? How do I set expectations around that? But what's happening, I think, especially in workplaces and communities, is that people aren't clear about what their criteria is, what their standards are, what their conditions of life are. let alone then being able to communicate them. So we're all walking around making up stories in our head about ourselves and each other, and then playing out these loops and these trauma responses and all the things that happen. And we end up barking, or we end up being silent or shutting down, or we end up playing games, or wherever it might be. And it's because we don't know what game we're playing, and we don't know what the rules are. And I think when it comes to psychosocial activity, this is about how do humans relate to one another, and how do I relate to myself, and where do I have the permission inside of me to be who I am and stand up for who I am. We're getting a massive rise, as you would see post-COVID, particularly around minority groups getting a voice. And this is the reason, is because there's moments where people are going, it's okay for me to be me. It's okay for me to stand up to that. And when that groundswell gets even bigger, someone will try and shut it down. And that's where we then have this opportunity, I think, in all aspects of our organizational development and our community development, to work on difference, and to work on what we would see as seeing the person for who they are, rather than what we might label. So I'll stop there for a second. Does anyone want to add anything? We've got some beautiful things coming into the chat. I'll just read that, but put your hand up if you want to also talk. So Glenn's saying, at many workplaces, we need to leave our values at the door to say stay safe and get ahead. Knowing what I stand for is one thing, actually doing something about it is often another. Isn't that just a shame? I hear you, and I think that's true. Vanessa, many or most of these responses of bullying and not speaking up and other are based in fear. Yep. Most of us are afraid of losing a job, relationship status, whatever we take the well-trod. So to take the well-trod path. As far as I know, the only thing that can conquer fear is love. That's why you're so wonderful in the world, my friend. And the only way we can understand love is to take time to find out more about each other. Radical collaboration. Beautifully right. All right, anyone want to speak? Thank you. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I just want to reflect on leaving your values at the door to get ahead of the organisation. I know it's easier said than done, but I find it's important to reflect on your own values, and if they don't align with the organisational values, then you're probably in the wrong place, probably in the wrong workplace. However, I know that's easier said than done, because some people, to maintain their lifestyle and the living, they can't go somewhere else. But
absolutely, and I think, and I agree with you. And in an environment that we have, an economic environment we have, I think there's a lot of people who are trapped. Now, this is where we go, what's our criteria of life? Which part do I want to be trapped by? Do I want to be trapped by a mortgage, or do I want to be trapped by being in a shit job? These are the questions that we've got to answer. This is where, so I don't want to be in a shit job, so I'll run the gauntlet of living hand to mouth over being trapped by a mortgage or something like that. And other people have different, so, and let me be clear about this. Your criteria is your criteria. They're not to be labeled or judged, but just know them. It's not my job to tell you what your criteria is and tell you whether it's right or not. You just make yours. How is your life? You live your life how you want to live your life. That's nobody else's business. But the fact is that I think so many people feel trapped by what they think they're supposed to do and how it's supposed to be. And this is where we are not questioning. We are not questioning what we are actually wanting in our life and how we're going to live it. We just fall into, it's very hard to swim against a slipstream. Not that I've ever actually swum against a slipstream, technically, in an actual waterway. Mike, we're going to get towards the end in 5 minutes, so I'm just going to ask you to add any moments of clarity, insight, resonance.
Yeah, for me, one of the key answers to this in a team setting or a community setting, whether that's a small community like a family or a larger one, the best versions of it are when we not only have our own set of standards, values, etc., that you were talking about squared away, and we're able to articulate them to ourselves and to others, but we also develop a collective version of that. And somebody made the point earlier that that radical collaboration idea, it takes a bit of time, but that time speeds things up ultimately. So, in the most high performing workplaces I've seen, a lot of these issues just disappear because we've got such a clear understanding of not only the pieces that we should be compliant with, but you know, what our standards are, our standards of behaviour, what we accept and why, and what we strive for and why, and many of these issues disappear in cultures like that. But it takes it takes building some trust initially to even get into those conversations, and often the transactional cadence and pressure of just getting the next thing on the to-do list done prevents us from going there.
So very true. I feel like I could leave us with a question. I'm a root cause person. I just always like, what's the first step, or what's the root cause to something? And I truly believe it comes with being aware of yourself and the choices that you make for yourself in your world. Where are you choosing, or where are you following? And following is okay. Like I follow my calendar. You know, my calendar tells me what to do, and I do it because I program my calendar. But the rules of my calendar are up to me. I don't like meetings before 10, so not much goes in before 10. It's up to me to program the calendar, and then I can follow it. So I would really encourage you, whatever situation you're in, if you're in a workplace, in a family unit, it might be in a community group, whatever it is, wherever you are, is to really, every time you kind of do something, and it doesn't have to be every moment of every day, but maybe significant things, you think, that actually makes me happy. I actually really want to do that. What am I getting from this? What am I giving to this? And the starting with that moment really helps us then, as leaders, particularly in organizations, we start to go, what am I actually expecting of this group? What am I driving this group to do? Is it actually getting an output that I intend, or am I just following something that should be expected? And it gives us the opportunity to really question. And the beautiful thing about this activity is for you to do inside. You don't have to get exposed right now with that. That's just start with you. Start with your internal decision-making processes, to start with your own awareness of things you are doing or not doing. And then we can extend that out past that. But I think starting with ourselves and understanding how we make our decisions and what we are willing to do and not do, and for what reason, is a really good starting point. I wanted to let you know, I'm just putting this in the chat. There's a very big link, and I don't know why it looks that big, but if you click on it, and please do so, open it up into your browser for later. We'll send this out on email as well. Mike and I are actually doing a half-day course on this where we get practical, because some of you will be like, my God, this is like existential philosophy at this point, which it is. But now we want to do outcome type stuff. We want practical frameworks. We want to see activities in the workplace or activities at home, whatever it might be, wherever you are. So we're going to be doing this on the 21st of August with a little bit more deep dive, a little less navel gazing, and a little bit more practicality. Mike, is there anything you want to say just to wrap us up?
Just super looking forward to doing that piece of work with you, Suzanne. It's always a pleasure being in a room with you, and thanks so much for your insights. And the ones from the room too. A really delightful and rich conversation, and I'm stoked to be part of it.
Me too. I have to say, I love that everyone either typed or spoke. That means the world to me. I think conversation community is really important. I know there's a big conversation, and I know that it might leave us with more questions and answers, but that's kind of my favorite place to be personally. I like to think that we can continue having this conversation, and even if a couple of things have just really hit the nail on the head for you, or you don't agree with something and then you want to make sure that you do something different, that's cool too. Like, it's not just all about agreement. This is about just opening up thinking and then taking something away and just doing one thing. Beautiful man in Kenya who I was in a slum with, he said, just do one thing about one thing. That's all you've got to do today. Thank you, my friends. It's been amazing to see you. We're really, really grateful for your attention, your energy, and your participation. Live well. We'll see you soon. Bye. Thank you.